Oh, I didn't have to ask for permission that time.
Oh, nice.
All right. You ready?
Do it.
All right. Welcome to Essential Coaching Conversations with Kyle and Asim.
The real, relevant, necessary conversations to help you navigate coaching, teaching, learning, and life.
Coaches, welcome in season 2, episode 31 of Essential Coaching Conversations. Kyle, this might be a record in the last maybe 6 or 8 months of the recordings in the quickest possible succession that we've had. I think what we recorded 2 weeks ago ish, and we're recording again. So I think these daytime recordings are awesome. I've had 1 cup of coffee and 2 cups of tea today, so I'm feeling energized. I'm ready to go. Um, Still battling being sick a little bit, but you know, my wife brings home school germs. She passes them to me, and then I get sick, and then it's like a cycle. It's great. Even though neither of us work in schools anymore, the school germs still make an appearance because you have a child in school, and I have a wife who teaches children. So school germs abound in our household, but that's okay. How goes it for you? Let's have a little check in here.
Yeah, things are good, man. It's nice to be able to record a little bit in quicker succession, like you said. I guess that's one of the benefits of midweek football games for us is it's thrown things into a loop with all these Saturday, Thursday games that we've got going on, but it has sort of created or presented some opportunities, I guess you could say, in the middle of us we're also getting ready for our first bit of crossover season with basketball right around the corner and fall
Mm.
season's kind of finishing up. So, yeah, things are good. Kendall had a great first quarter of third grade, did good on her report
Yeah,
card.
there you go.
She's a lot better at third grade math than I am at third grade math. I still don't understand how and why we're teaching math the way we're teaching it, and I struggle with it every night. But she's picking it up, thank goodness. Um, and so yeah, things are good, man. I'm excited about hoop season. I'm excited about basketball. I've not gotten to watch a ton of football this year, collegiately or in the NFL, just by virtue of just kind of the way things have fallen. And we play soccer on Sundays a lot. So that kind of takes me away from NFL quite a bit. And so I haven't been able to be much of a fan in the
Mm.
fall. So I am looking forward to things will slow down eventually for us in like December and get a chance to actually sit down and watch some hoops. I haven't watched any of the MLB playoffs. My Dallas Stars are off to a really great start. I did get to go catch them live a couple weeks ago. We did get a weekend off and got to go watch a Stars game, so that was fun. But I've noticed that I'm having to try to pick and choose my fandom moments, and it's harder nowadays. So I am excited about basketball season getting kicked off here pretty soon.
So I gotta ask you this because this is my first foray into not coaching in a basketball season in what, like 20 some odd years? Did you find yourself not really caring about basketball for a while when you got out?
Yes, and I would say I don't care about it nearly as much as I used to, like as a whole. I mean, in sports in general too. Like, and I think I've talked about this before, like
Mhm.
getting into administration and kind of working in sports, like you don't get to enjoy sports
Right,
as much because it
right.
is a job now and you're not just being a fan all the time. When I got into coaching, I lost some of my fandom, Cowboys, Rangers, Duke, that kind of thing. And then when you get into coaching, you sort of all your effort and attention goes into your team, right? So it's hard to kind of save that for another team. But when I got out of coaching altogether, it was a lot easier just to not pay attention to it because you don't miss it as much.
Hmm.
I felt like I had a real hard time walking into a gym, like even just wanting to go watch like former players of mine play or buddies of mine that were still coaching. I had a difficult time walking into a gym because it gave me sort of this adverse reaction of like, man, I should still be doing this.
Right.
That has gotten better and easier over the years, given the fact that, man, I hadn't coached. I think this is like the 5th year for me now. But luckily, I have spent 3-ish or so years back in athletics, and
Right.
that helps
Right.
because I get to live kind of vicariously through my school's teams and programs, and we've got so many of them that you're constantly bouncing from one event, one team, so if we get beat, like, okay, that sucks, but like it's on to the next. Like we got to
Sure.
get ready for the next thing. And so you definitely lose some of the fandom, I think, but I also realize like it doesn't bother me as much as it used to. And I'll give you even a better or a more specific example. Like when we were getting the EC thing off the ground, like the work we were doing with the WNBA and like trying to get people to watch the streams, and I'm like breaking down, FIBA women's teams and WNBA teams, and we're like in the thick of it. I don't really care to watch much of that anymore, especially in that way. And I think part of it is just you only have so much energy, so much time, so much fuel to give. There's not really anything left to go around for something like that. But I do remember struggling it was pretty hard that first year just because it's all you've ever known and it's all you've
Right.
ever done. And even as a teacher, like you're a teacher, I was a teacher, I coached tennis, I coached basketball coach was still the identity, right? Like, so
Absolutely. Yeah.
even though you're doing 90 other things, you really view yourself as that one thing. And so it was really difficult, but I can say that time has made that a little easier. Especially when coaching buddies text you about some crazy parent or something they're dealing with, and you're like, yeah, I don't want to deal with that anymore.
Yeah, no, I am thankful for that piece. And so the reason I asked that, and you sort of brought it up, was like, I didn't break down the WNBA like hardly at all, right,
Mhm.
this year. And normally I'm like all about it. But I have found myself looking at watching basketball specifically as more of, and this is me talking about how I am viewing it, not what it is. I still view watching basketball as a research activity versus a recreational activity. And it's very hard to turn that part of my brain off. And so like I know there's going to come up like the first day of practice in Division 3 was last week or a couple weeks ago now. And I just like I know I'm going to feel I felt some sort of way on that day because you still have this biological clock that's like, all right, hey, October 15th, like people are going to practice and we have our little chats. We're like, hey, happy first day, whatever. But even that, like I reached out to some of my colleagues and it was great to catch up with them and like they're in the thick of what they're doing and being removed from it. I'm like, dude, I couldn't even tell you about why I spent so long doing that. Right. Not to say that I would never do it again, but like, man, I would definitely do it differently to where it doesn't take up this exorbitant amount of time to where being a fan, like you said, like you lost some of that fandom, that you can still be a fan and you don't view watching the sport that you coach as a research activity instead of a recreational activity. And I think so that's like in my mind where my struggle is right now going into the fall and into the winter is like at what point do I get to just turn on a basketball game and be entertained? And I'm not sure that that'll ever happen, right? Especially with how analytical my brain is. I don't think I'm going to be able to turn it off. And that's okay, right? I don't need to be able to turn it off, but it also is going to make it far more painstaking to just try to have basketball on and be engrossed in the game itself.
I will say this too, from the like you said, as a research activity. So in like what I do now, we went to the Stars game. The only thing I'm watching is
Yep.
what's on the video board, the ribbon boards, like how the event production is put together, what song is being played at a certain time, like when they cue the PA to go into an ad, like how many ads they have, just the flow of all of that kind of stuff. And like I don't know if anybody's ever been to a professional hockey game, but it's awesome. Like it's
The
one of the best
best.
live events you can go to. And the job that the Dallas Stars have done producing the environment on a goal is unbelievable. Like unbelievable. And just sitting there, and they scored 4 of them while we were there. So that was awesome. So I got to kind of experience that whole thing. And like somebody had to sit down and build that and then teach, tens of thousands of people kind of how to work in concert along with a lot of that. And I think if you see that all across college football. I mean, the A&M LSU game the other day is 108,000 people in Kyle Field, and midnight yell practice, and LSU's playing Ole Miss, and they've got the light up bracelets, and they're playing Boosie, and like that kind of stuff. I notice, or that's sort of my analytical research brain now. If I go to a sporting event, I'm not going to be entertained and trying to learn something to see what I can steal and bring back. I think the last time that I've watched anything and I was lost in like the pure enjoyment and entertainment value was Steph in the Olympics, because it was just unbelievable and like hard to fathom what we were watching.
Yeah.
And you didn't even see it. Like
I
from what I
didn't.
remember, like
I
you were
did
on
not see
vacation,
it.
like y'all didn't even see it. Like I don't know of another time where I was that like, oh my God, like I felt like a kid watching the game again, where I was just entertained by virtue of like Steph's talent, what he was doing, and then the
Right, right,
scale on which everything was, and it being in France, and knowing that we were playing them in the men's and the women's side. Like there was just a
right.
ton of storyline to unpack there. That was probably the last time, and I don't know what will match that anytime soon.
Well, I will tell
Pure
you
entertainment value.
what matched it the other day was, and those that have listened to the pod, they know that I am a Commanders fan in recovery. I have been a Washington sports fan since the day I knew what Washington sports were. My first memory in life was watching the then Redskins, now Commanders, win the Super Bowl on TV. Um, and Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commanders with a walk-off Hail Mary win the other
Yeah,
day against the Chicago Bears.
that was
And,
pretty
and
cool.
like, I'm not sure people understand who are not Commanders or Washington sports fans. Like, things like that don't happen to Washington sports franchises. Like, they just don't happen. Like, jubilation is not an emotion that we feel on a regular basis. Right. Like the last time I can remember, and this is my heat the cheese moment, I had a different one that had to do with climate change and probably is far more like consequential than Jaden Daniels throwing a touchdown. But I think it's indicative of how far that franchise has come just by virtue of the fact that there was a change in ownership that then freed people up to go do what they do best. And the last time I can remember even feeling a little bit of that was when Mark Brunell threw 2 late touchdowns to Santana Moss against the Cowboys on Monday Night Football.
Yeah.
We thought the game was over. Like we hadn't been able to move the ball all game. And he just throws 2 bombs to Santana Moss to beat the Cowboys, to beat your Cowboys on Monday Night Football. And this was back, I think I was in high school, right? So this was 18 years ago, something like that. I graduated high school in 2006.
I remember that game.
Yeah. I remember staying up to watch that, and I was so disappointed, and then like silently celebrating because everybody in my house was asleep. And I'm like jumping around as silently as possible when we're scoring touchdowns. And so, like, it's been 2 decades since we've been able to feel that again. Like that is the plight of being a Commanders or Washington sports fan in general, but a
Right.
Commanders fan. And like watching all the videos that fans submitted, watching like they had a cinematic recap, kind of like the cinematic recaps that your guy down there is doing, who's doing an amazing job. Like that was so cool. And I cannot emphasize enough how rare this feeling is as a Washington sports fan to know that like the team is sitting at 6-2. We have yet again another generational quarterback, but you have faith that the organization is not going to squander it like they did with RG3.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like even with this injury, right, just a small piece of this with this injury, they're like, okay, we're going to take it day by day. We'll see if he can go. And we're going to draw a boundary. We're going to update you on Friday if he can go. Right. And Mariota steps in and does great. And it's like, wait a minute, we have a backup who can play?
Yeah.
This is incredible.
Two guys?
We have two guys who can play. Right. And like Cliff Kingsbury is not out there like angling for his next head coaching job. He's enjoying being the offensive coordinator. Right. Like this is the type of stuff when we talk about heating the cheese, like everybody there is doing their job. And they're doing the job of someone else because it's the right thing to do in that case. Right. And Marcus Mariota, I forget who's, I think it was Zach Ertz, right? Who's in the twilight of his career, still a very good tight end. They asked him about Marcus Mariota. He's like, yo, Marcus has always been that guy. He just never had a system to play in like he did at Oregon when he won the Heisman and was the best player in the country. But now when Cliff Kingsbury comes in here and he's got this great system that's also malleable to the individual artist that is Marcus Mariota or Jaden Daniels, they can customize what they're doing and make them look really, really good and take their talents and make them exponentially better. And like that to me is such a foreign concept in Washington sports that's my heat the cheese moment for this week and probably for the season. That's like the play of the year already. And we're in week 9? I don't even watch football. I had it on in the background and all of a sudden they switched over to the Commanders game and I was like, what? We're on the national broadcast? What is happening right now? And I was like, oh crap. Like they just scored a touchdown, right? And like there's 30 seconds left. As a Commanders fan, I know I've been going on for this, but this is a big moment for me in my recovery as a Washington sports fan. When you see there's 30 seconds left on the clock, up here in New England, right, when Tom Brady was here for 20 some odd years, what did people say when you left Tom Brady 30 seconds to go the length of the field and score?
It's over.
Right? Too much time on the clock. You left him too much time. Name one Washington quarterback that you can say that about.
Jaden Daniels.
Now you can, right? Before it was like, 30 seconds? Great. That gives us another chance to score as the defense. You know what I mean? Like it was just like we were such the whole franchise was a laughing stock. And now it's like, wait a minute, in 30 seconds? And like, sure, that play, you run that play 10 times, 9 times out of 10, the Bears are batting it down, no touchdown, whatever. Right. But the other piece of this is that idiot, number 29 on the Bears, who's over there like talking shit to the fans and like, posturing and whatever. And like all the memes that have come out have been fantastic about it. Like, dude, what are you doing? Right. You're the guy who the ball went off your hands to score a touchdown. Like, do your job, bro. Like how he was allowed to fly home is a mystery to me.
He's the cheese be cold guy for the week.
He is absolutely the cheese be cold guy. Because you see him after the game, or not after the game, after that play. If you watch, I think if you watch the all 22 cam, he literally looks at his teammate and goes like this. He puts his hands up like incredulously, like, how could you let that happen? Like, bro, you were the one showing your whole ass over there.
You let that happen.
Right, yeah. You let that happen. Anyway, that is my heat the cheese moment of the rest of our podcast until something great happens. So over to you. What is your heat the cheese moment of the last couple of weeks?
I like how you got a heat the cheese and a cheese be cold all in one.
Well, the cheese has to be cold in order to heat it, right?
It took both there. So we appreciate number 29 for teeing that up for us.
Tyreek something. Let me look it up while you're talking.
All right. So mine is Ryan, I guess mine have really been more like kind of feel good stories, but we had senior day the other day for soccer, and my first year as a sport administrator, this has been like the closest I've gotten to work with somebody on the administrative level. And after being our SID for the last couple of seasons, these seniors were, freshmen, sophomores, and or maybe had a redshirt year or something like that when I first got to know them, and now getting a chance to watch them grow up, see them from a different side on the marketing side, and now from the sport administrator angle. it was really neat to just see their families come in. Like we have like Tomoyo is from Japan. Larry is from the Netherlands. We've got a girl from Oregon. We've got people that are, literally all across the country and all across the globe, and having their families there to celebrate that. You want to talk about heating the cheese, like the parents of a Division I athlete willing to send their kid halfway across the world and entrusting somebody in a school like ours to take care of them, and seeing that senior moment, and then seeing some of the seniors from last year who have come back. And one of our players, Josie Studer, who plays for Carolina Ascents and the new women's professional soccer league, they played in Dallas. And Steve, our head coach, and some of our players, they went over and watched her play in Dallas, and just kind of seeing these more like full circle moments where, talking about people having to do their jobs, like just the support system for somebody like that to play a collegiate career, and like Josie being able to go pro, and kind of just getting to celebrate all of that on the field with them. And a couple of those players that participated in senior day had season ending, ACL injuries a year or two ago, and watching them come back from that, and knowing that the trainers and the doctors and the patients and the rehab and everybody that it takes to get, just one singular athlete through a career, academic advisors, all that kind of stuff, much less an entire group of them. It's always really, really cool and a really special moment. It's the thing I always dreaded senior day as a coach, just because like the emotion that's coming from that. But it's also one of the coolest days of the year, because you just see like how it's hard to know what people put into something. You never really truly know like what something like that means to them. But I think you do get a glimpse of that, and
Sure.
just seeing like the pride on parents' faces where you're handing them their framed jersey that they'll keep forever. Like Callie Matlock, number 18, will be number 18 forever, right? And
Right.
that
Right.
her kids and grandkids will get to see that jersey one day, and the Letterman plaque and all that. And just it's really, really cool. And then you start to take a step back, 30,000-foot view, how many people it takes to heat the cheese in
Sure.
order to allow somebody to even be in a position like that is pretty cool. So senior day moment for me, hats off and congrats to the 10 young ladies that are graduating. And we'll have a couple that'll probably come back and still get a fifth year, but got a chance to go through the senior day ceremonies. It's hard to know what a senior is nowadays post COVID. We were talking about that a little bit
Instead of
earlier.
a senior day, it's got to be like a last year or final year day,
Yeah, final
like,
year of eligibility day. Yeah.
right.
It's so confusing, and it has been for a while now with all these extra years and all that kind of stuff. But that's a different time for another point. But yep, senior day, heat the cheese. Hats off to everybody that made that happen.
Love it. No, senior day was always a stressful day as a coach, right? Like, I'm gonna make sure you honor your kids appropriately, and like, really, it isn't even about the kid; it's about the family.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of cases, right? Where like you want to make sure mom and dad, or uncle, aunt, whoever is feeling like you have properly honored them and their kid. And so I know that you guys did an awesome job with that, and everybody left feeling really, really good. Number 29, just as a note, his name is Tyreek Stevenson. The top Google result for number 29 Chicago Bears is a headline that includes the phrase "You can't go unviral." So shout out to Tyreek Stevenson for truly, truly like freezing the cheese.
Yeah. Cheese was absolutely frozen.
Cheese was frozen, bro. Um, all right. So as we get into, we've been talking for a while now, and this has been great to just be able to share some laughs and catch up and stuff. I think like, I mentioned it a little bit talking about Cliff Kingsbury and Jaden Daniels and Marcus Mariota. And, we had a great pre-show where we sort of like, kind of like feted some of this out. And just this idea of like, and I'll let you take it from the art perspective, from why, like the origin story of this topic. But I think it's important to tee up to the listener why this matters. We have had a number of podcast episodes in the past where we talked about, experimentation, hacking standards, using the scientific method to ask questions. Essentially, like Raka becomes an extension of the scientific method. I think that is a very different thing. And I want to draw a distinction right now very clearly that that is a very different thing than treating coaching like a science or like an exact science, right? In essence, the scientific method, Raka, experimentation, hacking standards, all of the stuff that we are about is a form of artistry. It is not a form of creating an exact science. It's creating repeatable artistry. That's the goal, right? Repeatable, consistent habits that lead us to greatness, but we can paint the canvas however we want. So, with that, I wanted to qualify that for the listener, but I'm going to throw it over to you to sort of explain the impetus for why this episode has come about, and then we'll launch into the discussion piece of it.
Sure. So I mentioned got a chance to go to Dallas with Megan and Kendall a couple weeks ago, I guess. Kind of a rare empty weekend for us. Again, another benefit of playing all your football games on Tuesdays. It does open up the weekends a little bit. But Kendall's not a sports kid. I think she's a pretty decent little athlete. She didn't want to do anything in front of anybody. So she doesn't play sports, nothing like that. She didn't want to dance, ballet, anything like that. But she does have an affinity for art. And when she was in pre-K, she's in third grade now. When she was in pre-K, they did a little art session and they did this thing on impressionist paintings where they created their own, their own version of some Monets and some things like that. And it just so happened that at the Dallas Museum of Art, they have this impressionist exhibit. I guess these things travel around the country, right? Covered a couple weeks. I'm sure they go somewhere else. So this impressionist exhibit landed in Dallas, and we thought, you know what? Let's go watch a hockey game at 3:00, and we'll go catch some art and let Kendall look at these. So some of the paintings and things that she did in pre-K were going to be in this exhibit, and so we thought that was a pretty cool thing. So we took her over there, and of course, ended up having a really good time. But I caught myself, going through and being the analytical nerd, that we are. I'm like reading every little plaque and, kind of going through all this and reading about, the painters and the each of the pieces and kind of how they got to where they are. And a very common theme, I think, among most artists, whether that be painters, musicians, authors, whatever, is most of the ones that we now know today that are famous were not thought of that way when they initially got started. There's a very common theme and a lot of examples of being misunderstood, as these different stages in art continue to adapt and evolve. Like somebody has to be willing to take something that it currently exists, put their own spin on it, and try something new. And typically, it will work or it won't work. And again, like most of the people that we now know today were probably viewed as weird or odd or unsuccessful, or they got kicked out of whatever school they were in, or they got booed off the stage, or they got kicked out of this exhibit. And they were misunderstood or misinterpreted at the time. And they eventually kind of stick with it, and trends and things and ideas and all this stuff eventually kind of change and adapt, and eventually they become more famous. But one of the paintings that was in there, and I'm not French, so I may be screwing up the name of it, but George Seurat, impressionist painter, is credited with essentially inventing a new style of art, a new style of painting called pointillism. And it's where he literally just dots paint. There are no brush strokes. And so for those of you out there that have ever seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the painting of all of the folks standing at that park, the ladies in the hats and the dog and the umbrella and all that, that is a Seurat painting that is done by the dots. And there was that painting wasn't there, but they had a different one there, and it just caught my eye. I thought it was absolutely unreal. And to me, it just got me thinking, and we started texting on some of this stuff, is like, all right, so you want to be a painter, so you want to be an artist. And so you think like the only way to be a great world-renowned famous painter is you have to learn how to stroke a brush. You have to learn what different brushstrokes would be like. And this guy basically said, F that noise. I'm not going to use a paintbrush like you use a paintbrush. I'm going to do it in a completely different manner. And not only do that, I'm going to create a completely different style of art that everybody else eventually copies and then turns into their own version, right? Like that continues to evolve. Not like pointillism was the last thing that came from that. And just like ruminating on that and thinking about that in that art gallery about like what that had to have meant to be like, you know what? No, everybody else is doing this. I'm going to go do that. Everybody else is zigging. I will zag. I'm not going to be great the way you see greatness, or I'm not going to do what you think because it's the way it's always been done. And I think there are an inordinate amount of tie overs into teaching, coaching, leadership, so on and so forth. And, like you always hear the worst thing that any organization can say is like, this is the way it's always been done. And this guy literally created a new way of doing art. And again, like, it's not like everybody went, oh my God, that's brilliant. Like, this guy's clearly got it together. Everybody go paint this way now. And just the courage or the the stupidity it probably took to do something, to even try something like that. And then I naturally tie that into like what Brian has done with his Saba stuff and all the work that he's done. And the guy constantly gets his ideas stolen from him, just right out from underneath him, and people are profiting off of it and using it as their own. And everybody out there that is coaching basketball now is like using this guy's stuff, but he had to dare to be different first. And at first you mock him, and then you steal from him, right? And at first Surratt got mocked, and then you steal from him. And everybody sees this as an opportunity to kind of take their own thing and spin on it, and then sort of continuing to kind of go down this road here. And I'll throw it to you for your thoughts. Is like when we were getting essential coaching going, and even before then, like you and your 100-point games, and like us trying to figure out how do we get kids to see basketball in a different light. We didn't even know anything about Brian or Saba at the time, but it was us trying to create a way to go, okay, how do I get my kids to throw the ball inside, change sides of the floor, and play with some pace and take an open shot? And we can put this point system on it, but that's how we're going to teach basketball. And then by virtue of like you having that idea and this us sharpening that through 1,000 conversations and evolving it into something, it took going, okay, I have this weird idea that nobody else has done. And then you start to put those two things together from what we're doing and what Brian's doing, and you start to see all these overlaps, and all of a sudden stuff starts to click, and now everybody is out there kind of running with it. And I think in a world where we often talk about our craft and our coaching being an art, we talk about it and I think romanticize it that way, but we don't truly treat it that way. We treat it more as, let me take this recipe out of the book, I'm going to input these ingredients, and I'm guaranteed to get this product on the outside. If I put this into the machine, this widget will come out of the machine. And so if I download this PDF, or if I take this course, or I watch this guy talk about something on YouTube, and I tell my players to stand here and go here, then we will no longer turn the ball over while we're being full court pressed. And it never really works that way, because you're taking an art and you're trying to treat it like an exact science. And I'll kind of stop there and kind of throw it to you, because I think with this conversation could go a couple of different directions. But I think it's a great time right now, especially as football fall seasons are finishing and your winter seasons are getting ready to pick up, and you're sitting in the quiet depths of your office and you're thinking about how you're preparing for a season, or you're mulling over how your season went. How are you generally viewing what it is you're doing? Are you constantly rehashing the same things over and over again because that's what everybody else did, but it didn't work out as well for you? Or are we treating an art more like a science? Or do you need to maybe sit back and think, okay, just because painting a traditional brushstroke works for this artist over here, maybe I need to try to do something kind of in my own spin over there.
So much of what you just said reminds me that I think coaches, perhaps generally, believe that drawing plays is the art of coaching.
That's a great
Like it's
point.
literal art, right? Or that the art and these two things, and I'm saying or on purpose. It's not an and, it's an or that the art, quote unquote, of coaching is solely the human component, right? Like how you treat your team and how you get them to work together and all of that stuff. But what you just said about 100-point games, right? Let's start at 100-point games. You and I would both agree that neither of us had a clue what Saba was when we first started talking about 100-point games. Right? We like you and I would both agree about that.
Oh yeah, no, totally. We were clueless.
We were both read and react guys. So we were taking those DVDs and trying to go like verbatim Rick Torbett with our teams.
This brushstroke in this direction with this color at this thickness this way. Yep.
Correct.
Totally
Right?
prescribed.
Totally prescribed. But we weren't getting the results on the canvas that we were trying to paint on. We were getting our asses kicked because we were not Rick Torbett. And so what's that phrase? I think it's like necessity is the mother of invention. Necessity became the mother of invention, and I had to invent something in order to help my team be successful. So we created 100-point games. If Surratt had not created pointillism, would we know Surratt's name?
Very unlikely.
Very unlikely. It's not to say that the creation of his way of painting was better or worse than anybody else's. It was just different.
Mm-hmm.
And it served the purpose he needed it to serve in order for him to be able to express his talent. Much in the same way that when I talked about Cliff Kingsbury and Marcus Mariota and Jaden Daniels, the art that Cliff Kingsbury brings to offense has allowed his artists to create on the canvas that is the field. Right? And he's putting them in a position to use their strengths in whatever way they see fit within the construct of the system that he's created. Similarly with 100-point games. I don't care how we touch the paint and switch sides of the floor. I just need it to happen. Go create, kids. Use your talent to the best of your ability. I will be here to guide you. And so that brings me to this. We were talking in the pre-show about painting and going to a paint night. For those of you that don't know what a paint night is, you sign up for it online. They have them all over the place. You go, there's an instructor. They teach you how to paint a picture while you are sipping on the beverage of your choice, eating appetizers, and it's a fun time. Right? My wife and I have probably done 10 of them over the last 10 years. Especially before COVID, we really enjoyed it. And I was telling you, Kyle, about the instructions that they give at the beginning of a paint night. And keep in mind, a lot of the folks that instruct these paint nights, they are people who went to art school, right? They don't have to be sitting here like teaching some novice. And like, there's always some drunk lady in the back who like doesn't know what's going on, right? They don't have to be doing this. They do it because they want money, right? And they want to enjoy what they're doing. And like, this is a way for them to make an income. And one of the things that they always say at the beginning of these paint nights, in like when they're giving instructions, they're doing like the do's and the don'ts. Do not ask me if you are doing this right. Do not raise your hand and say, can you come look at mine? Is this okay? Am I doing this right? Does mine look good? Don't do that. Your painting is your painting. If you want to paint something other than what we are painting, I don't care. I don't like go enjoy. But stop comparing yourself to what I'm doing and stop comparing yourself to what your neighbor is doing. Your paintings are not going to look the same at the end of the night. They're going to look similar, but they are not going to look the same. You might throw in an extra branch on that tree. Does that make it wrong? No. That is your painting. Go enjoy doing it. So long as you are enjoying it, fine. So let's translate that to coaching. How many times have you heard this phrase? And I'm asking you, but also the listener. Coach, did I do that right? Coach, was I in the right spot? Well, I don't want to be wrong. In a chaotic game like basketball, a lot of that, especially in things like transition or in a press break, like you talked about earlier, right? Like 99% of the things that, like, the answer is going to be, I don't know. Right? Like, did it feel right? Did you help us get where we wanted to go? Like, there's so many ways to answer that question that is not yes or no. And it leads to the idea that we as coaches have to treat coaching like it is a true art all around. Not just the ability to draw your plays, not just how you interact, like it's the whole thing. And so I look at our pyramid and I look at that, like that right there is artistry, right? The art of managing all of those things in the creative way that works for you. So like when we say that we have tailored solutions to your context, that's what we're really saying is like, we are going to get to know the artist that you are and help you paint whatever it is you want to paint out of your coaching career. Right? Is that a fair assessment of what we're talking about here?
Yeah. And when you said, going back to, have you ever heard that before? I mean, instantly I go back to the classroom. Like, is this right? Did I do this right? You know, you're working on a problem or reading a book, you know, like, is this answer correct? I don't want to get it wrong. And it's not because I don't want to get it wrong because I want the satisfaction of doing it right. I just don't want to have to redo it and I'm ready to move on. Like, I'm ready to be done with the assignment. And so you sit here talking about, like, I don't care how we get it done. It's all going to look similar. We're all trying to do virtually the same thing, but how we go about it and what the end product is will be similar yet different. And that makes me think of, you know, everybody's favorite painter, Bob Ross. Like, we know Bob Ross is going to paint mountains. We know he is going to paint trees, and we know he's going to paint a stream or a body of water. But I don't think the guy ever painted two scenes that look exactly alike, because there never was this prescribed way of like how this was going to look and what exactly was going to be here. That happy little tree over there might not show up in another painting, or this happy little stream over here.
Right.
Just sort of, we know we're going to have a stream, but we don't know exactly where it's going to pop up yet. And because it hasn't shown itself yet. We haven't discovered it yet. But if you start to paint that Bob Ross and say, I'm going to put water here, then that painting likely is not going to be as good as it should be, because you're trying to force it. You're not allowing the natural progression in the art itself to discover itself. And so when you think about a Bob Ross painting to a possession of half-court basketball, the goal is to get the 7 or the 9, and we want a paint touch and change sides of the floor. That's the mountain, the tree, the stream, and the sky. But how we go about getting that, and every possession in and of itself, we want the same ingredients and the same fundamentals and the same pieces to it, but they're all going to look a little bit different. We may paint the mountain first this time. We may paint this first this time. We may decide to put a cabin over there. We may do that. So in the same thing of like that possession being art, we may do a ball screen in the middle of the floor. We may do a get action. We may hit the pinch post. We may go into a dribble handoff. How we get that process started might be totally different, but we're not trying to prescribe how we're going to get there. We don't know, because we simply don't know. And to me, that is taking a bit of the science, but allowing it to be art. That to me is the impressionism of sport, or the impressionism of whatever your craft might be, or whatever your particular art might be. And I think the same thing is true even in the classroom teaching a lesson. Like, I know today I'm going to talk about the scientific method, and I know that I want to be able to hit this, you know, point A, B, and C. But in this particular class with this particular group, or based off of a question that I might get from a student, I might have to go about that teaching this class 5 times today. I might get to the end product 5 completely different ways, but I've got to be malleable enough and adaptable enough to allow the class to get there. Because if I walk into all 5 classes and I walk them down the same prescribed road, we will all quote unquote get to the same spot, but we won't all know everything, what we need to know. And every class is going to be just a little bit different. Everybody's got the class that's a little bit behind or a little bit ahead, or got that one kid in there, or got the one kid that's great and smart, but they ask questions that they don't need to ask, or this class over here is real quiet and they want to read all day, but they don't want to participate, and everything's a little bit different. Again, nuance and context to the same team. You might have a 7-foot big. I might not have anybody over 6'1", right? Like, we may be nothing but 3-point shooters. We may be nothing but an inside presence. We may play 2 forwards. We may be a spread football team. We may be a wing T team. But at the end of the day, the whole point is to paint the picture, to score the point, or do whatever. But going about it in your own particular way that's good for you has a heck of a lot more value. And I think you'll find a lot more success going about it that way than trying to do it because the way a Seams team did it, that's not the way Kyle's team needed to do it. And just because Kyle's team last year did it this way doesn't mean that's the way Kyle's team this year needs to do it, because that's going to be a heck of a lot different too. But and we've talked about this over and over and over again, but there's anxiety and fear and chaos in that uncertainty that most of us don't want to go down. And there is at least this perception of, I'm coaching for my job, or I can't do that, or at least if I'm going to get beat, I'm going to get beat doing what everybody else is doing. Then it's a lot harder to kind of let go and do your own thing. But ultimately, what happens in any business, any enterprise, anything worth striving for, the person that takes the chance to do something different, there's somebody out there who's going to hit and get it right. And they're the ones that are wildly successful. And then all the rest of us end up trying to play catch up and eventually fall back into that same exact cycle over and over and over again. And I think that's where, in your league right now, that one coach that does things, the coach at Pulaski that doesn't punt, the coach that always goes for the onside kick, the coach that only shoots threes, or the coach that, it doesn't mean that if you never punt, you're going to automatically win a bunch of games. But if you can try the thing that your team needs to be successful and allow them to experiment with it, I think you're more likely to find, and maybe not win a championship, but higher, more consistent levels of success, like you said earlier.
Well, so the one example that really springs to mind, and I got to work alongside this person, I was on the women's staff, was Shaka Smart at VCU. Right? Think about this for a second. Think back to the mid 2010s. So from 2010 kind of to like 20, I'd say that entire decade actually. So like 2010 to 2020. Shaka Smart takes VCU, which very regionally people know where VCU is, but did you know that VCU existed before 2011? No, of course not. Right? Takes VCU to the Final Four. Havoc, sweeps the nation, right? Every coach in the country, made up statistic, 90% of the coaches in the country were like, oh, I got to go learn Shaka's press. Now, here's a little known fact. All right. The video coordinator at the time, believe it was Dwight, and Dwight is now a head coach down in South Carolina somewhere. And even Donnie Lind, who was an assistant coach, I think he might have been video coordinator at one point. He's a head coach now as well. In fact, almost everybody on that staff is a head coach right now, which is really impressive. If anybody emailed them, they would send them a DVD of practice and the drills to build their Havoc press for free. I still have it lying around somewhere, I think. Right? Because I just walked across the hall and I got it. Name me another college basketball team that won and got to the Final Four doing what they do.
I can't.
People tried, right? High school teams that did not have the athletes that Shaka and them had tried to do it. I tried to do it. I rebranded it as Chaos, and that was what we tried at Woodson High School when I was a first-time head coach. I wanted to press. I wanted to pick up full court, and I wanted to create chaos. I learned very quickly that I did not have the personnel to do that. It was not going to happen. But everybody wanted to be Shaka Smart. Everybody wanted to do the high energy drill where he takes a charge and dives on the floor and all that stuff. Everybody did it. And then we all reverted back to Tony Bennett's pack line defense because they were winning. The thing is, though, like, and those two guys, I think, are a really good example, right? Totally opposite philosophies.
That's a great duality there.
Totally opposite philosophies. The juxtaposition between the two of them could not be more different. At the end of the day, they both won a lot of games doing it their way. And I'll take it a step further, okay? Shaka Smart worked for Keith Dambrot at Akron, I'm pretty sure. At Akron? Yeah. That's where all this sort of came from, right? Clemson with Oliver Purnell, Keith Dambrot, so on and so forth. Shaka Smart now has a coaching tree. Will Wade down at LSU trying to do the same thing, not having the success that he could be having that they had at VCU. Right? Mike Rhodes, Penn State. They're all right. I don't know if they're doing the havoc thing or not. Mike Rhodes is a tough son of a bitch, though. I'll tell you that. I like Mike Rhodes a lot. I hope he has success at Penn State. But I don't think they can emulate what they were doing at VCU. Right? So Shaka got all of these things. Like, he collected all of these ideas. He created his own thing with the input of his staff, and it worked for them. His guys that are now on his coaching tree, not really doing what they were doing. Like, they can't do it at the level they were doing it at VCU. Okay. Tony Bennett is the opposite of that. Tony Bennett comes from a long line, right? His brother, his dad come from a long line of pack line, right? Play the blocker mover offense. This is just what we do in the Bennett family. However, Tony Bennett started playing a little differently in order to keep up with the Joneses, right? He had better players than his dad ever had at Eastern Washington. So I say all that to say, in their own way, did they collect teachings and did they collect styles, like art styles, right? So pointillism, impressionism, so on and so forth. Did they collect the techniques? Absolutely. But they painted on their canvas their own way. They reflected about their practice and said, hey, this is what makes sense to me. I need to be authentic to me. Here is how I'm going to put my spin on this. And I'm not just going to do it because that's what I know from the time that I was a kid or the time that I was like the most impressionable. I'm intelligent enough to, when I am presented with new information, I can either choose to adapt that and adopt that into what I do or put it to the side because it doesn't make sense for my context. Whereas I think there are a lot of coaches out there, and you and I fell into this trap. Like, we are in recovery from doing this. We looked at the read and react and we were like, oh, that is the bee's knees. Like, that's the best thing ever. And we looked at, Shaka Smart with Havoc. Oh, let's do that. And all of a sudden, we don't even know who we are anymore until we went and boiled it down and said, what do we need our kids to be able to do on both sides of the ball? What makes sense to me and is going to allow me to sleep at night instead of constantly fretting over the fact that we don't have enough talent on our team.
Yes. Because at the end of the day, what both of these coaches are doing is they're touching the paint, they're switching sides of the floor,
100%.
and they're getting open shots. And then on the defensive end, they're trying to disrupt that and keep those things,
Correct.
whatever their thing is, right?
Mhm.
What I find funny about, like, is Jaden Daniels a good quarterback? Is Tua a good quarterback? Is Trevor Lawrence a good quarterback? Like, is so like can so and so coach? Or is this person a good coach? And we're so in the moment that, like, if a rookie comes out and has 3 great games, they get labeled as a good quarterback, and then it's the systems problem that never lets them be that way. But if they have a rough first year, then they're terrible, and then if they finally grow into themselves, then the coach gets credit for it. And same thing with hot coaching candidates all the time. Like, I mean, Virginia literally lost as a 1 seed and won a national championship. So you talk about polar opposites,
Yeah, right.
like the same guy doing
The same guy.
thing had two totally, like, the best and the worst that you could possibly hope for in the tournament. Your worst nightmare and your greatest dream
Back to back.
in back-to-back years in a calendar year, right? So you and I, little idiot lackeys trying to figure this stuff out, we run the Bo Ryan swing.
Yep.
And then we get into pistol action. And then we run this. And then we get into read and react. And then we start doing this. And at the end of the day, not realizing that it's about the mountains, the stream, the trees, and the sky. But how we were going about it is we were trying to force a certain style of art onto our kids when we weren't equipped with those brushes or with that particular paint or with that particular style. And what you have to do as a coach, a leader, whatever it is that you're involved in, is you have to figure out for yourself and your group, like, what is going to lead most likely to that success. And so once you, again, like the way you say, you just kind of strip it all back, boil it all down. How do we best do the 3 or 4 things that we find most important? How do we get to that? And so if I've got a bunch of 5'9" athletes that are just quick as shit, but they can't dribble, all right, we're going to pick you up 94 feet. So when you turn it over, we don't have to dribble very far.
Right.
Right? But if we're a bunch of big, slow oafs, then we're going to try to get back as best we can, and we're going to pack it in, and we're going to slow the game down, and then we're going to beat the hell out of you at the other end. I personally prefer one style over the other, but as you get older and mature, and you learn a little bit more, you'll do whatever it takes to get the job done, to get the dub. So I'd be fine playing a style I don't necessarily want to, if that means that was going to set us up for some success. But it takes a minute for you to get to that point, I think. And where these quarterbacks, these point guards, these coaches, these whatever, we tend to rush to such a judgment and say, like, oh, they're good, or oh, they're bad. And what we're not realizing, and what we're not really giving enough credit to or credence to, is that particular environment lent itself to success or failure. And so you take Mike Neighbors, for example, who you and I both adored for many years and wanted to be like, and text him and he'll send you all of his stuff. Well, Asim, when he had Kelsey Plum,
Yep,
he was pretty good. Pretty dang good. In the Pac-12, your grandfather's Pac-12, right? Like, not
RIP.
not the Pac-X, whatever it is now. But when Mike Neighbors had Kelsey Plum doing what he was doing, it worked. Final Four. Mike at Arkansas doing a lot of the same stuff, getting real cute, naming positions rabbit and giraffe and elephant and whatever it is that he's doing, has not worked out as well. Does that mean that Mike Neighbors is a crappy coach?
Nope.
No, I don't think so. But does just because he got to a Final Four with Kelsey Plum mean he's a great coach?
Nope.
Oh, I don't think so. But is the environment, the situation, the context, the flavor of the day, like, does all of that stuff matter? Yes. Playing women's basketball in 2024 SEC is a little different than it's ever
toughest
been.
league in the country. It's
Honestly,
the toughest
right?
league in the country.
Like, right now, that is hard to do, right? But if he had Kelsey Plum at Arkansas right now, I like their chances.
Sure.
One of the best players in the world, right? But it's still, she's not the only one. It still took the right mix, the right chemistry. Maybe all the other teams were down for a year and he had this easy pathway, or you got lucky and you didn't have to face somebody in the tournament. All of that stuff matters. And that's where I know we've talked about this before, where like luck plays its part in a lot of those things. Like you said, Jaden Daniels could sit back there and throw that football 100 times.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was going to happen once the way it did, but it happened.
Right.
So now we're going to anoint Jaden Daniels with some sort of clutch gene when really he didn't have a dang thing to do with the catch other than he just kept the play alive long enough and ran around for a little while, right?
Because the end of that play was always going to be end of that play. There's going to be a scrum in the end zone.
It's the same thing.
One of two things is going to happen. Somebody's going to catch it or it's going to get batted down, right?
Yep. It is what it is. But some quarterback out there is going to go 0 for their first 5 drives in the first quarter, and they're going to be deemed as not clutch. But then all of a sudden you swap a Jared Goff and a Matthew Stafford.
Yeah, sure.
And look who's going to the Super Bowl a year later.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 years later, guess who's not so good anymore?
Mm-hmm.
So again, there's so many variables that we tend to not want to lean on, I guess. So many other things that are outside of our control or our context that we want to just say like, oh, today this person's good or bad. I think what we have to do is take a step back and understand that this particular canvas, this particular style, this particular paint, this particular what they're trying to paint, all of that context and nuance plays a larger role than what we typically want to maybe give credit for. But at the end of the day, the coaches that we know that are still successful or have been doing this for a long time, they have figured out their way of doing it. And you can go sit there and download the Mike Neighbors transition playbook and take the crappiest kid in the gym and call him a rabbit. It doesn't make him a rabbit.
Sure.
It's just not going to happen. But me coaching at Cedar Creek and then doing a lot of the same exact stuff at Simsboro, it worked a heck of a lot better at Simsboro. Because I had a Jordan Crawford and a Jakeeman and a D and a Gianni and a Mighty.
You had better paint to paint with.
I had much
and
more.
A little more freedom to make mistakes.
Exactly. There was a bigger canvas, if you will,
Sure,
right?
Yeah.
So if we screwed up the tree over here, not the end of the world. We can just we can go over there and still paint and everything was going to work out. We didn't have to be as perfect because we were more talented. But when you're not as talented, the margin for error becomes a lot smaller. We could turn the ball over 15 times, 20 times in a game and still beat you because we were going to get more possessions out of it and do more with the possessions we have. Think about a football team right now that's not very good on offense. If they throw 2 interceptions, that's detrimental because they're only going to get so many options. Whereas the Kansas City Chiefs from a few years ago, Patrick Mahomes could throw 3 first-half picks. They're down 17-10. It's far from over. But that works there.
So I want to take you back to what you just said about margin of error, because I think this is where we can probably close this, but also leave room to have a maybe not necessarily a part 2, but extend the discussion at some other point of what the job of the coach is as the artist. So when we think about literal art, right? You and I have both done graphic design. Here's a great example of this, okay? You and I have created, you more so than me because you're way better at it than I am and have done it professionally, but both of us at one point in our career were responsible for the social and art content that was generated for teams and programs. Accurate?
Accurate.
You and I are both also self-taught Photoshop people. We can go back to our art and point out every mistake in a graphic. Things that only we would know, right? I didn't fully mask this. I didn't fully erase that. I don't really like the color scheme here, right? We would look at it and we could pick it apart in 2 seconds. Other people, though, from the outside, they would have no idea, right? They have no clue. Our job as the artist was to give ourselves the largest margin of error possible to still put a quality product out, to then raise awareness about whatever it was that we were advertising or publicizing or whatever. I think, based on this conversation especially, that the job of the coach as an artist is to create the biggest margin of error for their players and for their team, to then create a sustainable, consistent opportunity to win in every matchup they go into. And you can only do that if you know what's supposed to be on the canvas and what's not, and you're able to live with happy little accidents, like Bob Ross would say, because you know that the bigger picture is still going to be painted the way that you and your team have decided gives us the best opportunity to be successful and put a product out on the floor that nobody would know is having these happy accidents. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So what you're saying is we need to be anti-fragile.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you think about that from the stakes of, okay, how do I create the most margin for error? Meaning that if something happens to us, we can get back up. One bad mistake doesn't end us, doesn't ruin us. One turnover, one loss, one bad week doesn't end us. We are built to sustain and handle what is thrown at us. We can handle an injury to our back line. We can handle having to go to our backup quarterback. We can handle our point guard fouling out or not having 3 timeouts with a minute left. We're built for this sort of thing. And we're creating this anti-fragility by building in these safeguards and making us more adaptable, more malleable, more conditioned for the things that are going to be thrown our way. And I think I like the way you phrase that by basically widening our road. So if you're walking down a wide road, you can swerve the car all you want to and still stay on the road, right?
Right.
But if you're driving or walking down a sidewalk and somebody's coming at you or a dog gets under your legs or there's a pole or you get bumped, you fall off the road. The idea is to widen that road as much as possible, creating more anti-fragility by basically creating a little bit of a weather guard on you and keeping you from, if you do get knocked down or if you do get bumped off to the side, you're right back on the road. And those happy little accidents they're not problems at that point. They're just part of the experience, and it's
Right.
part of what sharpens you and makes you better. And I go back to that blog I wrote about Kendall. I don't know how, this has been a couple of years ago now, when she was in like kindergarten, and she drew the shape. She had to draw a triangle, and she drew it in the wrong part of her homework in crayon that you couldn't erase, and she was devastated because she screwed up. But the part that she drew the triangle, she had to draw a picture of an animal. And so the triangle that she drew in the wrong spot just became the nose of a cat. And she drew a cat around the mistake. And I don't think she would have ever decided on a cat, or she might have sat there for an hour struggling on what to draw. But it was by virtue of the mistake created her next solution. And I would argue that the solution she got from the mistake was better than any other solution she would have come up with on her own. That to me is anti-fragility. That to me is creating more of a widened margin for error that allows you to continue down that path. So if we are supposed to enter the ball to the right wing and that's denied, that doesn't ruin our entire offense. We just simply go to the next domino or whatever you want to call it, and we just move on to the next read. We are creating more margin for error. But I think the scary part for coaches is the only way to do that is to create more opportunity for your kids to make their own decisions.
And you give up some of that control, right? And you're not consistently asking yourself, well, am I doing this right? Right? Just like at paint night, you just have to like give up the control a little bit and allow the art to take place within the parameters that you set for your team.
Yep. And I think that's where we as adults or coaches struggle the most. In we say we want to give more margin for error. We say we want to widen that road. We say we want to build in the anti-fragility. We say we want to be adaptable and all those kinds of things. But when we start to really look at what that's going to take, then our own insecurities start to creep in, and our own doubt starts to creep in, and our inability to allow other people to have control of a situation or turn the decision making over to 14, 15, 16, 20-year-old kids, and being able to trust that they're going to do that. And at the end of the day, I think you can say that that's our own insecurity and not wanting to hand that over, but I think it's another instance where we tell on ourselves, because all it does is expose what we haven't taught yet.